Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Yud Daled in Baba Basras. We learned for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Sunnah Sarv Shiur. We're about 10 lines down on the page. Tana Rabbanim. Einos and Sefer Torah lo orcho yoser al kepo v'lo kepo yoser al arko. When you make a Sefer Torah, the length should be equal about to the circumference if you want around it. I mentioned this yesterday, Avram, at the end of the Shiur, right? That optimally you should have the length of the Torah, meaning the height, should be the same, should be equal to the circumference. So you don't make it the length longer than the circumference, nor do you make the circumference greater than its length. Okay, it's not so easy to come up with that, right? Because until you finish it, depends on the thickness of the parchment, etc. Shasholas Rabbi, they asked Rabbi Shiur Sefer Torah B'kama, how much is what should the shear of the Sefer Torah be? Meaning, in other words, what should that circumference be? So he said, well, begvil shisha. If you use gvil, which is parchment, thicker parchment, which is processed with walnut juice, etc. Shuava rashiv kefa gadol tzarich shisha tfachim zui mida lios nigmar b'shisha tfachim hekav b'ksav beinoni. For an average script, the way you write it, the average, if you do the average, then you need 6 tfachim. If you use a fixing, then it should be 6 tfachim high, will equal the circumference of 6 tfachim when you finish with it. That's was average writing and thicker parchment. The cloth kama. What about a thinner cloth, like the inside or the outside of the hide? What about that? He says, any of that, I don't know. So I don't know how long that should be. I'm not sure. Funa wrote 70 Sifrei Torah. Out of all 70, only one worked out to be that the length was equal to the circumference. In other words, that's optimal, but it's very hard to reach that. He wrote 70, and only one turned out to be with those dimensions. He wrote one sefer on the hide of a calf. Apparently, it was thinner. This Ramaleh, it worked out. Now the rabbis looked at him with envy, and he died. Got an ayin hora. In other words, he wrote one Sefer Torah. He wrote it on calf's hide, and it worked out perfectly for him. And the rabbis were jealous. People were jealous. They gave him an ayin hora, and he died. An amazing thing. You got to keep a low profile. I'm going to learn Rav Amnuna. Kasav Rav Ami Dalmei a Sifrei Torah. Rav Ami wrote 400 Sifrei Torah. He didn't write. There's no way he could have written 400 Sefer Torah in his lifetime. Maybe when he said he wrote 400 Sefer Torah, he wrote the word Torah, like in the phrase Torah Tziv Alon, that pasuk Torah Tziv Alon Moshe, Eved Hashem, Torah Tziv Alon Morasha rather, Torah Tziv Alon Moshe, Morasha Kilas Yaakov. That pasuk, maybe that's what he meant. He wrote that 400 times. Couldn't have written a whole Sefer Torah 400 times. Not the Rav Meir Shapiro, another fantastic amount. It says Rav Yana planted 400 vineyards. In order to have halacha of a kerem, it's got to have two. You have to have 5 vines, 2 and 2 perpendicular to one another, and then one in the middle with like a tail and the tail sticking out. So there you can have it. That's what he calls a vineyard. So he could have done 400 of those, right? In other words, if a person has a vineyard, he doesn't have to go out to the army. If he just planted a vineyard, how much does he have to have? He has to have those 5 vines. Maybe that's a simple vineyard. Maybe he did 400 of those. Otherwise, the number 400, whether it's for Sifrei Torah or for vineyards, it seems like a fantastic exaggerated amount. Meisvei. Okay, so going back to our idea that a Sefer Torah should have the same circumference as its length. So let's understand something. Meisvei. Aron Shasa Moshe, the Aron in which we put the luchos, the famous Aron, the ark, Sha'asa Moshe, that Moshe made. Plus, it gives Amasai Mechetzi ark. It has 2.5 amos its length, B'amachetzi rachbo, and 1.5 its width. Ba'ama b'chetzi kamaso, and its height was 1.5. Okay, Ba'ama basi shetzvachim. We're going according to the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. And an amma, the average amma, was 6 tvachim. It's about, that's what we call today. It's about roughly 20 inches. But it's an amma of 6 tvachim. So if the length was 2.5 ammas, how many tvachim is that? 15, right? If you have an amma is 6 tvachim, and you have 2.5 of those, 2.5 of 6 times 6 is 15 tvachim. Okay, we'll get that. Now, luchos, what were the luchos? We have a Kabbalah luchos, archan shisha, at a length of 6 tvachim, v'archan shisha, and a width of 6 tvachim, v'avin shlosh, and a thickness of 3 tvachim. Munachos can I get shor? They were put against the length of the aron, against the length of the aron. So you had 6 tvachim and 6 tvachim against this length. That takes up 12. Kama luchos ochus bar. How much space do the luchos take up in the aron in its length? Shnei maser tvachim. Okay. Nishtaru sham shlosh tvachim. Out of 15 tvachim, we just said that the 2 luchos, 6, they were each 6 in length, and they were put against the length of the aron. That took up 12. So you have 3 left over. It's semi and tefach. So 1 tefach goes chetzi l'kos zeh v'chetzi goes zeh. The aron itself, the measurements that we gave, that the Torah gave, which is 2.5 amos, which is 15 tvachim, that includes the thickness of the walls of the aron. So let's say the wall on one side and the wall on the other side, let's say the south and the north, or the length, the top and the bottom, each a half a tefach. So that's 1 tefach. Semi and tefach chetzi l'kos zeh v'chetzi goes zeh. So you have 2 tvachim left over. So the Sefer Torah was put in there in 2 tvachim. Because the pasuk says, "Ein ba'aron rak shnei luchos." The lashon of Ein, there is nothing in the aron, only these things. Shnei luchos avadim. Asher nirsham Moshe, that Moshe put there. Okay, so the pasuk says, what was in the aron? Only the luchos, right? But Shnei Moshe, my Ein ba'aron rak. What is that lashon of? There is nothing to just say in the aron was the luchos, or the only thing in the aron was the luchos. It says there's nothing in the aron, only the luchos. It's a double negative. My ain ba'aron rak mirachmiyit. It comes. It's a one exclusion after another. Mirachmiyit all rabos. Yes, like a double negative is a positive. So one limitation, one exclusion followed by another one means that it's including something. It says there's nothing in the aron. There is nothing in the aron except this, but only this, as if to say there is something else there. What's that? The Sefer Torah. So El Rabbah Sefer Torah. Shemurach ba'aron. Okay, so the Sefer Torah is in the aron. So what do we see that the aron? How much space did the aron to put up in the length? 2 tvachim, right? Because we said 12 tvachim was taken up by the luchos, and 1 tefach were the walls. So you left with 2 tvachim. So now he goes on to explain. So pernasta or lochos. So you've explained and you describe the aron and its length. Say upon its aron, what about its width? How many luchos ochos ba'aron? How much do they take up? 6, right? Because they were placed. The width is 6, and the of luchos 6, and they're along the length of the aron. Okay, but on the width it takes up 6 tvachim. Nishtar sham shlosha tvachim, because we said how much is the width of the aron? Amma v'chetzi, which is 9 tvachim. So if the width of the luchos took up 6, then you have 3 tvachim left over. It's same and tefach. So you have 1 tefach goes chetzi l'kos zeh v'chetzi l'kos zeh. As we said, the walls are a thickness of a half a tefach, so that takes up 1 tefach. Shtar sham shnei tvachim, and so what's left there is 2 tvachim. What do you do with those 2 tvachim? Otherwise, it would be very hard to stick in. And we said that the Sefer Torah fits in the 2 tvachim in the length. Like the width of the length of the Sefer Torah is against the width of the aron, taking up 2 tvachim in its length, right? But if you wouldn't have a little extra room there, it would be hard to squeeze it in. So that's what those 2 tvachim are. That's all the sheet of Rav Meir, who holds. I think I said Rav Shapiro before. This is the sheet of Rav Meir, who holds that the standard amos in the Caleb in the base of Mikdash were 6 tvachim. Rav Shapiro ba'ama bas chamisha tvachim. He says no, we're talking about an amma has only 5 tvachim. So therefore, how long is the aron? 12.5 tvachim, right? Because it's 2.5 amos. An amos 5 tvachim. So 2.5 times 5 is 12.5. So Valuchos Arachon Shisha. Now Luchos had a length of 6 for Arachon Shisha, as we said before. Luchos placed on the length of the aron. So if the aron is now 12.5, and the Luchos, one so to speak, on top of another, end to end, right? Take up 12. How much you only left with a half a tefach there? All you have left is a half a tefach, right? What are you going to do with half a tefach? The wall has some thickness. Okay, it's not a half a tefach. It's a half a tefach is 2 fingers, so it's 1 finger. Say the half a tefach is basically half a tefach has 2 fingers, right? Because a tefach has 4 fingers. So a half a tefach, so one finger for this one finger for that one. That's what goes to that. So where's the Sefer Torah? There's no room for the Sefer Torah here inside. Okay, then he goes on to say, that's the length. Say upon us, what about the width? Kamalucha. So what's the width of the Aron now? 7.5, right? 1.5 amos, and we're talking about amos at 5 tefachim according to Rav Yehuda. So the whole thing's only 7.5. Kamaluchos ochlos ba'aron shisha tefachim. So what? 6 tefachim. That leaves over tefach and a half. The shtar sham tefach machza. That leaves over tefach machza. Say mehen. He takes out the word etzba here twice. Say mehen tefach chatzi tefach lekosazev. The say mehen chatzi tefach etzba lekosose. He takes out the word machza rather, not the word etzba. Say mehen tefach etzba lekosazev etzba lekosose. Right, that's a half a tefach. Right, that's a half a tefach, 1 finger on each side for the thickness of the wall. And the sham tefach, you have a tefach. Shabo amudin omnim. The pillars, there were silver pillars that they had that were placed on the shulchan. They were placed in that tefach. Shneimar appear nasola melech shalom Hashem and made himself a fancy room, a hallway. Me'atzal banam from Lebanese wood. Amuda also its pillars were made also kesef like sticks. Kesef, repeatus of its base was gold. Mercado argamon, and it had purple purple wool on it. Ba'argas, and then he goes on. What's the gear? So the gimel argamon. Yeah, tocho rotzif ava ba'argos. He says ba'argos. He adds on that the inside was rotzif ava was lined. And what on the side of the Oro, not inside the Oro, there's no room left, right? We described we've taken up all the room inside the Aron. The Aron is much smaller, according to the sheet of Rav Yehuda, that at Am is only 5 tefachim. So the chest, the box that the Plishtim sent as a gift to Hashem was placed on the side. We'll see there's a plank sticking out that it sat on. Shneimar, and the golden vessels that you returned as a guilt offering, tasim b'argas, put them in a box, mitzito on the side, and send them, and send them along. The Sefer Torah was sitting on top of that box, right? The argas that had the kalim inside, it was sitting on that. Shneimar, Sefer Torah said, take this, so mitzad aron bris Hashem, put it on the side. Mitzad hamonach it wasn't inside the argas. So according to Rav Meir, the Sefer Torah was inside the aron. According to Rav Yehuda, there was no room inside the aron, so it was placed on the side. Mani mekayim ein ba'aron rock. What about that lashon of ein ba'aron rock to tell me that there was something in the aron? The double negative, the double meaning telling me that there was something in the aron besides the luchos. Shivrei luchos, the broken luchos, the first set of luchos that Moshe broke, were put in there too. Shemanachim bar were put in the aron. They were put in the aron. It's a famous line that they say the Gemara says about how many chachamim when they're older and they have a little dementia, they're older, they're frail, they don't remember anything. They're still to teach you that you still have to give them the proper respect, because we say by the aron. The broken ones were also put in the aron, not just the regular luchos, the second set of luchos. Those are Menachem Shambar. Moshe took right. So Moshe was over them later on and said became rich. We'll see that also, right? So he became rich with them. Maybe other parts of it, we'll see. But they were put there. Eventually, maybe Moshe was over to them, but they were put in the arm. So here's our problem. All this was described, all this, but Isak Sefer Torah had kefo vav tvachim. If you say that the circumference of the Sefer Torah, again, when take a middle Sefer Torah where you put the gartel around, let's say the gartel should be 6 tvachim. We know the rules of pi. The rules of geometry are that the diameter is about 1/3 of the circumference, right? Pi d is the circumference, right? Pi d is the circumference. The diameter being d, and pi d 3.1416, whatever it is the third. Now, it's not exact. Tosfos brings that down also, that it's not exact, that we know that it's actually slightly less. The diameter would be slightly less because it's 3.14. It's not exactly 3, but that's close enough for our measurements. In other words, if somebody said, well, maybe the Chacham didn't know that. The Chacham knew that because all you had to do was take a pin and a string and figure it out. And you could see exactly they could have not known that they couldn't have not known that it wasn't more than 3, that it's actually 3.1416, right? It's a little bit 3 and more than 3.10% more than that. They couldn't have not known that because very simply, just put a pin in this thing, put a string around it, and measure it. You'll see how long it is, and you'll see very simply that it's actually more. So they knew that. The point is that halachically, the difference doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference halach. It's approximately 3. So if that's the case, if you have a Sefer Torah has a circumference of 6, right? You said the Sefer Torah has to have a circumference of 6. Well, if it's a circumference of 6, then the diameter of the Sefer Torah is 2, right? It's 1/3. Since it's rolled in the middle, right? Meaning it has 2 etzichaim like our Sefer Torah, that takes up a little bit more, right? Takes a bit more. So nafish, there's a little space in between. Nafish, let me trade it. It's a little bit more than 2 tefach. Rafta the beni, the space between the 2 columns, between the 2 etzichaim. So betray pushkehechi. So how could that sit in two tefachim? In other words, according to the first sheet of Rav Meir, that the Sefer Torah was in the aron, in that 2 tefachim space between the wall and the 2 luchos. How could it fit in? It's actually the width of the Sefer Torah would be a little bit more than 2 tefachim. How could that fit into 2 tefachim? You're right. Sefer, Sefer Azara l'tchilaso hu niglo. The Sefer they had in the Azara was actually all rolled on one side, right? It wasn't with 2 atzichaim. Bakati trei v'trei. Okay, so it's not more than 2, but it's still 2. How could you fit 2 into 2? It doesn't fit exactly. Ravashi the karchle port of a karchle el. What happened was it was rolled up mostly, but not entirely. It was mostly rolled up, and then there was a little bit extra because the extra would have made it a full 2 tefachim, which couldn't have fit in. So they sort of hung that on top. In other words, it was put in, let's say 90% of the Sefer Torah was rolled up into one scroll, put in. It was a little bit less than 2 tefachim, and the extra part had a separate roll on top, was just sitting on top. That's how it worked. Amarashi, that's what it says. It was rolled up a little bit, and then on top you put the rest of it. Rav Yehuda Makami de Lese Argas Sefer Torah Argas Sefer Torah. According to Rav Yehuda, who said that there was no room in the aron for the Sefer Torah, and it was put on the box that the Plishtim sent. So before they got the box, where did they put the Sefer Torah? Where was it put? Where was it sitting? Where was the Sefer Torah of there? I saw. I think I mentioned last week. Breitowitz said that this idea that you have 90. There's a few different gearses in Sefer Torah, right? There's a few different versions, slightly different versions. 99.999% of every Sefer Torah is exactly the same. That's the Siyata Ishmael. But there were a few words that are like Siv and Kri, etc., that could be changed. That some have this way, some of that way. He said that Moshe Rabbeinu, the last day that he died, he wrote one Sefer Torah. That's the permanent one of the Beis Hamikdash, and then he wrote 12 different ones for each of the tribes with different messages in them. There was like Al Pi Hashem, there were different messages for each tribe division. We don't know what that is today, which one's what and what the meaning was, but that's how you get that. In any case, this was Moshe Rabbeinu's Sefer Torah. So where was it put? There was a little plank, a little board sticking out from the aron. And it sat there. Rav Meir, according to Rav Meir, that it says that it'll be put next to the aron, right? Next to the aron. What does he do with that drush? It's not in the aron. What does he do? You put the Sefer Torah next to the aron. It's in the aron. It means this. It was put inside the aron. According to Rav Meir, the first shita, it was inside the aron, but it was put on the side of the luchos, not between the luchos. In other words, if there's enough room in the aron for 2 luchos and the Sefer Torah on its width, right? So maybe it's between the luchos. No, it's on the side of the luchos, not between. It's really inside. It's inside the it's inside the aron, but on the side of the luchos in the aron. Pardon? No, the Eitz Chaim is included. The Eitz Chaim is included in the two. Yeah, the Eitz Chaim, that's the Chaim are included here. Except he says in this case that they didn't have two Eitz Chaim because it wouldn't have fit. It would have been too big. So this is when they had it all in one roll. They had it all in one roll, except and even in one roll it would have been two. It would have been two tvachim. Two tvachim would have been impossible. You can't put two tvachim inside two tvachim. You have to have a little bit extra. So he said it was rolled into, let's say, a tefach 0.9 or 0.8, and the extra part was like sitting on top. It's like as if there was a second Eitz Chaim there. Like a second part of the scroll. For a mayor, amudim me'echav kaimet. So according to a mayor, where the amudim, we said that according to that he had the Sefer Torah there in the inside the Aron. According to Rabbi Yehuda had an extra tefach for those for the amudim, for the silver sticks, the silver pillars. But according to Rav Meir, that the Sefer Torah was inside. Where were the amudim? But they were on the side of the They were on the outside. Rav Meir shivrei luchos menachem bara minam. How does Rav Meir know? According to Rabbi Yehuda, we said that what does it mean? Ain rock. To tell me what else was in the Aron, not the Sefer Torah, but rather the shivrei luchos. But how will Rav Meir know that? Rav Meir shivrei luchos menachem bara minam and not delay. But Rapuna he learned from Rapuna's Rosh. Damar Rapuna. Minus of Asher Nikra Shem Hashem Tzvakos Yoshi Bakrubim Alav. That pasuk in Shmuel it says Asher Nikra Shem the double Lashon Shem Hashem Tzvakos Yoshi Bakrubim Alav. The fact that Hashem's name says the name of Hashem twice, Shem and Shem, to tell me not only the luchos but also the shivluchos were also learned out there. That's what Rav Meir will say. What do Rabbi Yehuda do with that pasuk? He uses that Shem for Rabbi Yochanan. Hashem in all his various names. Hashem has 4 letters and more letters up to 42 letters. All the various kinuyim of Hashem's name were all placed in the Aron. Well, according to we said this is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Then what will he do? Doesn't he also need it for that drasha? So how does he know? How does he say that if you need the drasha if you need the drasha of Shem, tell me that all Hashem's name was in there. So you can't use it for the shivrei luchos. So how will Rav Meir know really shivrei luchos? How will Rav Meir know the idea of shivrei luchos that they were inside? From Rabbi Yosef's Rosh, the Tana of Yosef, Asher Shibarta Bisamtam. Pasuk says that you have to place other ones, you write new luchos to replace the other ones, Asher Shibarta, that you broke, and put them Bisamtam Ba'aron. But the fact that Asher Shibarta is next to the word Bisamtam is to tell you that the ones you broke should also be put inside. Not only the Pashup Shat and the Pasuk, that the new ones will be put inside. It's Asher Shibarta Bisamtam. That's how Rav Meir will learn. Okay, what will Rav Yehuda do with Asher Shibarta v'Samtam? How we boy like Rish Lakish for Rish Lakish, Rish Lakish, Asher Shibarta that you broke. Amalek Rish Baruch with the Moshe, Yasher Kakach Shibarta, right? Yasher Koyach that you broke him. In other words, it was something that Moshe did on his own. Moshe came down and he saw the egel and he was all upset and he threw them down. Hashem didn't tell him to break the luchos. He did it on his own. But afterwards, Hashem was masmum to what he said, and he said, "Yes, I agree. You did a good job." So that's Lashon Asher Shibarta, Yashikoach, Yasher Kochach Asher Shibarta. Not so much the connection with the Samtam. He doesn't darshan Asher Samtam. He just darshans Asher Shibarta. Presumably, the other Shita could also hold of that. In other words, even Rabbi Yehuda who darshans the shivrei luchos from rock and from what are the words? Ain and rock. So he knows the shivrei there. The Shem he uses for having many of Hashem's names, all of Hashem's names in the Aron, and he doesn't darshan Asher Shibarta b'Samtam. He darshan Asher Shibarta Yasher Kochacha. Tarabara. Siman Shal Neviim. There are 8 books of Neviim. What are they? Yeshua B'Shoftim Shmuel Malachim Yiri Yecheskel Yeshaya Ushnei Masar. Now, this is not our order. Our order is Yeshua Shoftim Shmuel Malachim. But then our order is Yishai, Yirmiyah, Becheskel, which is more chronological. The order that he has here, Yirmiyah, Becheskel, Yishai, will say Ishnei Masar is the end. In other words, he switches around. Yirmiyah, Yecheskel is right, and Ishnei Masar. Really, you could say that you just take Yishai out of this order. He has Yishai as number 7, and we have it as number 5. So if you put in Yeshaya after Malachim, it works out to our order. But the order that he has is that Yirmiyah and Yecheskel come before Yeshaya and Shnei Masar. And we're going to explain that right now. Mifti, Hosea. Hosea is the first of the Treyasar books, right? Hosea Karam was there first. Hashem spoke first to Hosea. Now, this is not Yoshua, it's Hosea. It says, what do you mean? Hashem spoke, he was the first Navi that Hashem spoke to? Doesn't mean that. There were many Nevi'im between Moshe and Hosea, including Yoshua and others. They were all Nevi'im. So how could you say that it means Hashem spoke first Hosea? He was the first of the 4 Nevi'im who prophesied at that time. Rashi explains that he was the first one who prophesied at that time, and therefore that's what he means by Chilas Hashem Shia. But the point is, he was the first of those 4 Nevi'im, and Rashi tells us who are the Nevi'im. Those were the kings, right? Where are the other ones mentioned? Hosea. I don't see the Rashi here, right? I think Rashi said it somewhere that he was the first of 4. He was the first of 4 prophets who prophesied at that time. Okay. Oh, here he says what we're saying. The Gemara says it. I knew it was somewhere. Hosea, Yeshaya, Amos, Micha. I knew it was right in the passage. I'm looking at Rashi, it's right in the Gemara. Okay. Hosea, Yeshaya, Amos, Micha. So he was the first of those 4. So if that's the case, so why do we say that you have Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, and Malachim? Why isn't Hosea listed first? If he was the first of them, he was the Nevi'im, he was before Yeshaya, before Amos. Why isn't he first there? Why do you say, where does Hosea? At the end, in Treyasar, why isn't he before them? Since his Nebuah is written together, who were the end of all the Nevi'im, they were already in the Bayis Sheni. Sofnim were the end of Nevi'im. So he's included with them. Since his Nebuah is listed together with the other 12, including and they were at the end, so he put them together. So why have them together together? Why do you have an Estrayos? Why don't you have a Chadasar and put Hosea by himself before Yeshaya? Right? We understand Yeshua, Shoftim, and Shmuel Malachim. That was earlier on. But why doesn't Hosea listed first? I need the Zutter because since his Menu is very small, Hosea is a very small sefer, as all of the Treyos are individually are very small. Since it's a very small mirror, so we get lost. We're afraid it was going to get lost. It wasn't like it was. You had Art Scroll and all these publishers and there's millions of copies. Afraid it would get lost. Yeshaya Kadam Yirmiyah, but Yeshaya chronologically was before Yirmiyah, and before Yecheskel. So looking at Yeshaya Bereisha, like we really have that order today, right? We have the order in chronological, but the Gemara had it the other way around. That Yeshaya was after them. So why isn't Yeshaya before Yirmiyah and Yecheskel? Since even the Malachim Sofa de Chorban. Since the Malachim. The end of Malachim is the Sof of the Chorban. The Yirmiyah Kulach was all about the Chorban. The end of Malachim is about the Chorban. The beginning of Yirmiyah is about the Chorban. The Yecheskel Reisha Chorban. The beginning of Yecheskel is Reisha, and the end is Nechama. And Yeshaya is Kulei Nechama, meaning it's mostly Nechama. In other words, for this reason, that the end of Malachim is talking about the Chorban. So we go into Yirmiyah, which is all about the Chorban. So the Chorban, and Yecheskel is the beginning. The beginning of Yecheskel is Chorban. So again, it carries on from Malachim throughout Yirmiyah into Yecheskel, which is all about Chorban. The end of Yecheskel is about Nechama. So it talks about Nechama, and then you do Yeshaya, which is mostly Nechama, and that's why we have the order that way, not the chronological. But we talk in our order. We have that order of Yeshua, Shoftim, Malachim, Yeshua, Shoftim. Malachim and what Yeshua Shmuel rather Malachim. Yeshua Shoftim Shmuel Malachim, And then you have Yeshai, Yirmiyahu, Yecheskel, and then the Trey also. That's the order that we have. What about the Ksubim, right? The later scriptures, the later writings. What are they? Rus for Sefer Tilim, Eov, Mishlei, Koheles, Shir, Kinnis. Kinnis is, of course, Eicha, Daniel, Migalas, Esther, Ezra, V'divrayam. That's all the Svarim in Ksubim. Lamanda evening Moshe. Yeah, we're going to have Machlokas later on. When did Eov live? Right? There's one sheet that he never really lived at all. It was all just a mushal. Right? But there's some say that he lived at the time of Moshe. So Liktmei Eov Bereisha. Why isn't Eov there first? After all, he was much earlier. He lived at the time of Moshe. Says Asul Parasalam saying we don't want to start Ksubim with a Peronius, with punishment, with something bad, sad. We don't want to start with that. So Rusnavi Paranasu. Rus is also the beginning of Paranis, how they went to Chutz La'aretz and they died. They were starving and they died there, and etc. It's also Paranis. It's Paranis Dislay. It's a Paranis that has a good end. There's a positive end. Rabbi Yochanan, Lamed Krishma, that's why she called Lush. She Yatzim Man David. Riveo LaKadosh Baruch Hu, who replenished God with songs and praises. In other words, the end is very good. That's what she called Lush. Lashon of Riveo or Rivu, that she replenished him, that she nourished him with those things. It's a good lashon. So therefore, that's why the Seder of Ksubim starts off with Rus. Now, of course, this is not exactly the order that we have today, but this is the order the Gemara talks about. It was Mikasvan. Who wrote these things? Who wrote all these Svarim? You mentioned all these Svarim in Ksubim. Who wrote them? So he goes on to explain it. Moshe Kasav Sifro. He wrote his Sefer Parshas Bilam. Why is Parshas Bilam listed separately? Because it really had nothing to do with Moshe. It was all about Bilam's life and his happening. Moshe say to Masab, so he says, well, Moshe wrote all that. We'll come to discuss that in more detail. Did he write the last 8 psukim? Of course, the famous one, the Eov, the Eov, and Eov. So what did Moshe wrote? Torah's Moshe, the 5 books of the Torah, and Parshas Bilam, and he wrote Eov also, which would indicate that he lived in Moshe's time. Yoshua Kosov Sifro. Yoshua wrote his own Sefer, Shmona Psukim Shabbatorah, the last 8 psukim in the Torah after Moshe died. Shmuel Kosov says Shmuel wrote Sifro. He wrote his own Sefer that it's called by name Shmuel. V'Shoftim, and he wrote Shoftim, Berus, and he wrote that from also Shoftim Rus. David Kosov Sefer Tilim. He wrote Sefer Tilim, and included in that, Idea Source can be also included 10 other Skanim who also contributed to Sefer Tilim. It's not exclusively written by David. He mentions these other ones also, right? Sometimes it's a psukim, sometimes it's a whole parak. And he mentions these other 10 elders. Who are the 10 elders? Idei Adam Arishon. Adam Arishon also is included as mentioned there. Rashi says, the Adam Arishon could go Miro Einecha Mayukurecha. He's talking about that's Adam Arishon speaking in first person. Adam Arishon, Idei Malkit Tzedek. Malkit Tzedek is also mentioned in there. Rashi says, Numa Shem Shevli Mini. Kofiyot is all Malkit Tzedek. Idei Avram Avinu. Idei Moshe. Right, field of Moshe and other prophets there, and Avram Avinu is mentioned, right, because it's Esan Mizrahi, the powerful Easterner. That refers to Avram. By Haman, that was his name, Haman, not Haman, Haman. Right, Maskil Haman starts off by day Dusan, Hamatzech Dusan, by day Osaf, right, Mizmor Osaf, right. So we have all these other ones mentioned. That's 7 that he's quoted so far. By day Shlosh Bnei Korach and Day Korach. Mizmor, the 3 sons of Korach, are also mentioned. So those 10 Skanim are included in David HaMelech. David HaMelech wrote, let's say, most of Tilim, but he included these other elders as well. Yirmiyah Kosov Sifra. Yirmiyah wrote his Sefer called Yirmiyah, right? And Rashi says that they wrote most of these things before, right, towards the end of their life. The Sefer Melachim, and he also wrote, Yirmiyah wrote Sefer Yirmiyah and Melachim, Bekinos and Eicha. Chizkiyo and his colleagues Kosfu, what do they write? Yeshaya, Mishlei Shir Shir Kos. Now, of course, we know Mishlei Shir Shir Kos are all the words of Shlomo HaMelech, right? But Rashi points out that Chizkiyo was credited because he was Marbit's Torah and he enabled them to learn Lasika Torah, so he's credited with these writings too. Even Yeshaya was not really his; it's mostly words of Yeshaya. Rashi points out also that Menashe killed Yeshaya's grandfather, right, before, and they didn't get a chance to write it down himself. So because they usually write it before they died, and before he died, he was killed. So it's written down. Therefore, Chizkiah either commissioned Yeshai to be written, or he was responsible for being written down, as well as Mishlei Shiur Shim and Kolas, the works of Shlomo Melech. Anshe Knesset Gdol, the people of Knesset Gdol, which included, Mordechai Yehudi, Chagas Chaya Malachi, Zerubbabel, etc., and their colleagues. They wrote, what did they write? They wrote Sefer Yecheskel. Now, why did they write Yecheskel? Rashi says because the Nebuah was in Chutz La'aretz and he didn't write in Chutz La'aretz. Tosfos disagrees with that because he says the Yirmiyah also was in Chutz La'aretz. He was in Mitzrayim and he prophesied there, and it's not never brought down that he came back. So it could be that he did write in Chutz La'aretz. The fact that that you say that Yecheskel, not Yecheskel, because Yecheskel couldn't have written because it's in Chutz La'aretz. Tosfos takes issue with that, and therefore they didn't. So, but in any case, we see here that Yecheskel wrote. Anshe Knesset Gdol was written. They wrote Sefer Yecheskel v'Shnei Maser, Daniel, and Megillas Esther. They wrote those. Ezra, Kosef Sifra. Ezra wrote Sefer Ezra himself. The Yachas Shel Divrei Yomim, and all the lineage that's listed in Divrei Yomim. This one was the son of this one, son of this one. Ad lo, until his own lineage. Thus Ezra listed his own lineage in Divrei Yomim, and he wrote all that. Ezra Kosef Sifra v'Seach Shel Divrei Yomim. Messiah the Rav Saput Rav Rav though Ezra did not ascend from Babel to Eretz Yisrael until he listed. In other words, he gave his pedigree. Basically he showed who he was. He listed his pedigree. Well, and then he came up. Uman Aske, who finished? You say over here that Ezra wrote his own sefer and the lineage in Divrei Yomim until him. What about after him? Who finished it? Manas who finished it? Nechemi ben Chachai, he finished it. He finished the sefer Ezra. Amar Mar. Yeshua Kasuf Sefer Shemona Pesach Torah. Yeshua wrote his sefer Yeshua in the last 8 Pesach Torah. Tanya Commander Amar Shemona Pesach Torah Yeshua Kasuf. This Bryce that we just said goes like the Shita who holds that the last 8 Pesach Torah were written by Yeshua. The Tanya B'Yom Hashem Moshe Ever Hashem. Moshe died there. He was a servant of God. Efshir Moshe based because of B'Yom Hashem Moshe. How could Moshe have written the words by Yom Moshe? If he died, how could he have written it? Ella Adkan, because of Moshe. Moshe wrote until this pasuk, and then with the pasuk of Yom Moshe was written by Yeshua. Kambeil because of Yeshua. Divrei Rav Yehuda. That's what Rav Yehuda. Amillah Rav Nechem. Some say it was Nechem Yeshita. Amillah Rav Shimon. So Rav Yehuda or Rav Nechem argued with Rav Shimon. Shimon said, "Efshir Sefer Torah Chasar Achas." Is it possible to imagine that Sefer Torah could be missing one letter? Osachas, even one letter. Eksiv Lekoach as Sefer Torah Zeh. Moshe Rabbeinu himself said, take this Sefer Torah in its completion. So how could he have said that if he didn't write the whole thing? Until these last 8 psukim, Hashem told him what to write down, and he wrote it. Afterwards, Moshe wrote it with tears. In other words, he wrote about his own death, as if it happened already. Moshe Nembalon, like it says later on, Baruch. Baruch said to him, he writes out, he calls out to me. In other words, he dictates to me. It's called Vermaila. All these words, and I write it in a book with ink. So therefore, we have this machlokas whether Yeshua wrote the last 8 psukim. That's our Bryce. It says Yeshua wrote the last 8. Other shita is that Shimon that Moshe wrote it crying. Kamanos Ohad Yeshua. Who's the following go like? Yeshua Barabba Amarav Gidol Amarav Shemona Pesach Torah Yachid Korasan. Who does it go like when it says that? The last 8 psukim Torah you shouldn't divide up. One person should read it all. It's like a separate kind of a book. Don't split it up. It's just like one addendum, you could say. The whole thing. Who's the one who says that only one person can read? You don't split it up into different aliyahs. Lame with doesn't go like Rav Shimon, because according to Rav Shimon, that Moshe wrote the whole thing, including those last 8 psukim, but those written down with tears. L'chara doesn't go like Rav Shimon. It sounds like Rav Yehuda, who says that the last 8 psukim were not like the rest of the Torah that were written by Moshe. The last 8 psukim were written by Yeshua. So I feel telling Rav Shimon, hold the said, yeah, even though they were written by Moshe, but they were written differently. The other ones were written, let's say, b'simcha, but the last 8 psukim were written with Moshe was crying as Hashem dictated him his own death. So we have this machlokes. Yeshua Kasav Sifro. Now he said Yeshua wrote his sefer and the 8 psukim according to the sheet that Yeshua wrote the last 8 psukim. How can you say that Yeshua wrote his own sefer where in the sefer of Yeshua it says he died? Yes, the Aske Elazar finished it. In other words, in all these cases, we'll see that except you hold like that Moshe wrote every letter in the Sefer Torah, fine. But the other ones were all like, they didn't write, they were responsible for having it been written, like we find with Chizkiah, who was responsible for putting Mishlei, Shirashim, and Koheles and Yeshaya down on paper. But it doesn't mean that even when it says Yeshua wrote his own Sefer, it doesn't mean he wrote every letter in the Sefer, because it had to be finished by somebody else. Says there also, even Elazar, he said Elazar finished, Elazar himself died, is written in Yeshua. Zaske Pinchas finished it up. Shmuel, because of Shmuel wrote a Sefer, Shmuel made Shmuel died. Aske God Achoza, God, the seer, he was the one who finished it. In other words, Shmuel wrote most of it, he's responsible for it, but he didn't quite finish it. Who finished it? Aske God Achoza, V'Nasan and Navi. And Nasan and Navi, they finished it. They finished the Sefer Shmuel. David, because of Sefer Tillim, Aidei Asar Scanim, he finished. David wrote the Sefer Tillim. Included in that were Asar Scanim, who contributed to it. Why don't you also consider Eitan Azrachi? You said over here, Aidei Avram. What about Eitan Azrachi, who's also mentioned, right? As we said, Rashi quoted it before. That says what? That Eitan Azrachi is mentioned in the Tillim. Amarav, Eitan Azrachi Zeo Avram Zabram. Ksiva Hanami, Ksiva Hacha, Eitan Azrachi. It says in Tillim, Eitan Azrachi, Ksiva Hasam, Mihayed Mi Mizrach Tzedeh, who testified righteousness from the east, and that's all from the east, and that was Avram Avinu. So Avram Avinu is really Eitan Azrachi. Chashav Moshe, Chashav Haman. You considered, you counted Moshe as one of the 10. Aidei Moshe, the last line on the previous page. You counted Moshe, and you also count Haman. Ivam Arav Haman Zem Moshe. It's the same person. So you don't have 10, you only have 9. It's Ksivacha Haman, Ksivasam B'chol Beisi Ne'emanhu. Haman is a lesson of trustworthiness. So it's the same person. So how can you count it twice? This Trey Haman, there were 2 Hamans. One Haman was a separate Haman, and that's the Haman mentioned in Aidei Haman, masculine Haman. That's not the one that's Moshe. Moshe is filial of Moshe. Another Trey Haman. Moshe was also called Haman, but the Haman that we're referring to in Tillim is a different Haman. Trey Haman up. Moshe, because of Sifro Parshas Bilam, the Eo. Now go back to Moshe. Moshe wrote his own sefer, let's say without the last 8 psukim, and he wrote the Parsha Bilam, and he wrote Eo. If he wrote Eo, Messiah Rav Levi, Levi Ralachma, Dam Rav Levi Ralachma, Eo, Moshe, Eo was in the time of Moshe. Ksivacha, it says Mi Yitain Efo, right? In Eo, it says who Halavai, somebody give Efo v'yichbim, and my words were written down. But the lashon of Efo is a very unique word. It says here, Mitain Efo v'yichbim Moshe. V'ksiv hasam ubama yivadeh Efo in Chumash, right? Moshe said the word Efo. So you see that Moshe was at the time, that Eo was at the time of Moshe. Why? Because it says Efo by Eo, and it says Efo by Moshe, indicating it at the same time. Maybe it was in the days not of Moshe, it said Mi Efo, who had Sayed. There you are, Mi Efo, who had Sayed, right? Who all of a sudden, hunted the food for me, right? When Yitzchak was blinded and couldn't see. Mi Efo, like, what's going on over here? So you see, by Yitzchak also you have that strange word Efo. So maybe you're going to tell me that Eo was in time of Yitzchak. Maybe it's in the days of Yaakov. They'll say Imkain Efo Zo Sasu, right? If that's the case, bring him these karbonos, bring him these gifts. Also Efo. But Yosef said Efo Haim Roim, right? When where did the brothers go to shepherd? Which one?
The last one you did the Yosef.
Yeah, where's the best?
Efo.
No, the word is no, I understand. But it's like it's a different it's hay instead of olive, but it's the same kind of a word. Like what's going on? Where? Like who? What? It's like who? What? Where? Like what happened of it? How do you translate Efo with an olive? Where it's the same translation. Anyway, go see where they are shepherding. Anyway, he says maybe it's Yosef. It says how do I know? There's different Ephos here. Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef. There are different ones too. How do you know that it's the one that Moshe? He says no. You can't say it. It says Mi Tain Vasefer Yichaku. In Eov, it says Mi Tain Vasefer Yichaku. Put it in the book for Yichaku, and it'll be a work of law. It'll be inscribed as a law. Moshe is also called the lawgiver. The Siv, right? We call that today also. In modern Hebrew also we use the word Machokikim, the 120 people, legislators, right? Make the laws, right? The Machokek. The Siv, he saw himself first. Kisham Chalkas Machokek Suffer, it'll be written down, inscribed the share of the Machokek. So you see, Moshe is referred to as the Machokek, and it says in Yov Lashon of lawgiver, and that's unique to Moshe and Eov, not Yosef, Yaakov, or Yitzchak. So that's how you know that he was in those days. Okay, so that's the opinion. This is what we said that Moshe wrote the book of Eov. That shows you that Eov was in the time of Moshe. Rav Omer Eov Miraglim. He was in the days of the spies. In other words, not that Moshe wasn't there, but he says they were specifically in the time of Miraglim. Here it talks about in Eov. It says there was a man in the land of Uz, Eov Shmo. Right? We're talking about these spies that we just had a few weeks ago, right? Hayesh ba eitz and Mayim, it's Chazakem, etc. Hayesh ba eitz. So eitz and Utz are similar, telling you these are days of they're not, it's not the same word. Hacha Utz, Hasam eitz. Zachagamar. Zachagamar Moshe Yisrael. Look what Moshe said to Yisrael. Yeshna la'osa Adam. Is there a person there? Sheshnosa baruchos ke'eitz. Is there that person whose days, so they live that long, whose lives are as long as as wood, umegan aldoro ke'etz, and he can guard his generation like a tree, like strong. That's what he means that when he says that's what he means when he said hayesh ba'etz. He didn't really mean eitz literally, to say that utz and eitz or something. He said, is there anybody like that? So that's what he means. That it doesn't mean that exactly the word eitz has to be like utz. He was telling them, is anybody there strong in that way? So therefore, utz and eitz are considered the same kind of a word. Rashi says here, just Eov Sherach Yavim Rabim, right? Eov was called from the land of Utz. He says, is Eov there? Is there a land? Is there anybody like Eov? That's what he meant to say. Is there anybody there like Eov? Whose years are long. Eov Sherach Yavim Rabim. Is there anybody like there? So in any case, I don't know if the one who says these days of Meraglim is different than Moshe. Really, Rabbi says days of Meraglim. Maybe he's just being more specific. And then we have another opinion here. Yosef one of the rabbis was sitting for Shmuel bar Nachmani. What did he say? Yosef become an Eov lohayev lo nivra. Eov was just is a mashal. There was no such person. El mashal it was just a metaphor. Amalei Alechem. The pasuk says Ish haya be'eretz Uz. What are you talking about? It says there was a man there be'eretz Uz. Eov Shmo. Well, El Me'ata, when Nasa Navi was ranking out David HaMelech, right? What he said, El Me'ata, well, the Russian, the poor guy, ain't called Kiyam Kif, so the man is only a little lamb, Achas Kana, Asher Kana, that he's living on. Mihabe, was he really there? El Mashal was giving an example. If you're telling me that it's only a mashal, why did you have to say this is his name and this is his city? That indicates that this was the retort to the one who held that it was only an example. He was much later. He came from the people. He came with the people who came back from Bavel. He learned a base medrash. He had a base medrash. He wasn't in the days of Moshe, not in the Meraglim. Not that he was a metaphor, but he lived in the day in time of Gola. He lived in Ole Gola, and he lived in Feria. The days of Eov was from the time they went into Mitzrayim until they came out. So how could you say they were in the time of the Ole Babel? It was only like the equivalent of time. The time they went into Mitzrayim until they came out, let's say 210 years, it means that Eov lasted that long. Eov lived that long. But it doesn't really mean that he lived at that time. He lived the equivalent of the time that they spent in Mitzrayim. So they have these different shitas, and we'll continue with this discussion tomorrow from Meisvei on the top of Tesvav Amid Beis. Have a good day, everybody.